living positively, how ethical humanism helps navigate troubled waters. And our speaker is Bart Worden. Bart has been the executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical Culture and Ethical Humanist Societies since June of 2012, and is also the clergy leader for the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester in White Plains. Bart is a social worker who has worked with programs that help people recover from psychiatric disability. In his role as AEU Executive Director, Bart has been working to raise the profile of the ethical movement and ethical societies, grow the movement through the formation of new ethical humanist groups, and expand program and training services for ethical societies and their members. Please welcome Bart Worden.
All right. This one says classes are good. So, welcome out here today. I'm really happy to see all you folks here. I can raise it? Yes. Oh, this is so cool. Oh yeah, I'm liking it. So I think that's probably a little lower. There we go. How's that? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, the nice thing about this kind of lectern is, you don't have to wear pants. You can just. I did, but I realize now I didn't really have to. So it's just good to know. I really appreciate you all coming out today, and I see a lot of faces that I recognize back from my internship over 20 years ago here, and I'm really happy to see you here today. I'm also especially happy to see family members and somebody from the Northern Westchester youth folks here, so a shout out to you all today. It's really great to have you here. I'm here to talk about living positively, but let me start out with the bad news first. We live in challenging times. Our people are divided, our government is in disarray, climate change threatens our very existence, and quite frankly, I've been struggling to feel hope lately. The press of bad news can be difficult to push away. It's been disappointing to see the erosion of progressive policies and programs that I thought were at least heading our nation in, maybe even our society in general, in a positive direction. Most telling to my mind is how our national government, the Congress, the executive administration, and now the courts, has been devolving into unending and ever-expanding fights between opposing mobs. It's more than disheartening, it's downright despicable and potentially ruinous. And yet, even with all that, I come to you today feeling kind of hopeful. Now, my wife would say it's largely because I'm continually bathed in a variety of serotonin and other related chemicals in my brain that just make me a happy person generally. But I also have the belief that there are things about ethical culture that inspire hope. And I hope these things being shared today will inspire some hope for you as well. A key to ethical culture is its anticipation that when people come together, they will find ways to connect in good ways and to find things out about each other that are worthwhile, that are beautiful, that can unleash the potential for good, that can make our world a better place to be. All right? That core idea, that core expectation drives what happens in ethical culture. All right? So we have very simple ideas that make this make ethical culture work. Right? You have the first one, which is you just assume that each person has somehow a unique worth about them. Right? That we're all individuals, and yet we're all individuals that are worthy and deserve to be treated as ends and not just as means. You also have this belief that somehow we come to express that part of ourselves through our relationships with each other, right? So we have a simple golden rule, right? That golden rule acts so as to elicit the best of others, knowing that when we do that, we have a chance of eliciting the best from ourselves as well. kind of a long golden rule, but think about it. I mean, it really fits so well with the idea that when people come together and when people of goodwill behave with goodwill, good things can happen, right? And they do, all right? So, what does that mean then for us? Well, you know, I was kind of listing all these issues that have me feeling discouraged. And in the end, I had this realization that there's no way to fight our ways out of our predicament. All right? In other words, you can win an election, you can win, get a various legislation passed, and all those kind of things are great. But if the fight remains, it's very hard to have a conclusion that we're really going to want to see, right? Because as soon as one group wins, the losing group starts working its way towards their next win, right? And you wind up pulling apart the very things that we're trying to build. What's so strong about ethical culture, to my mind, is its belief that we need to keep knitting together. We need to keep connecting and finding good things in each other, even people that are very different from us, so that we can start building a world that has more compassion and more fairness in it. Now, the thing is, you know, we may be unique people, but we're not really original. I mean, when you think about it, your thoughts, your ideas, these are all borrowed things, right? You wouldn't have them unless somebody had them before you, right? We develop our language, we develop our experiences, our take on experiences, our descriptions of experience. All of our ideas are described in language, right? And our language is what we inherit from our communities. So it's very difficult for us to be original, and very easy for us to be derivative. In other words, to be kind of pulling things from the past. So the key is to pull the right things from the past, right? And to pull the right things from your current experience so that you have a chance of living in a way that you'll be proud of at the end of the day, living in a way that will be effective at moving the world in a direction that you would like to see it go in. Now, I'd like to imagine that we're all part of this very huge fabric of humanity that stretches back in time and stretches across all cultures, right? That we're part of the warp and woof of what has been before and what is coming afterwards. And so we can kind of delve into that fabric to look for clues for how we might want to do things ourselves. So for instance, 400 years or so ago, when Europeans first came to this part of the world to colonize it, there were already a lot of people living here, right? And I shout out to the first people of Manhattan. Manhattan, by the way, is a Native American name. The first Manhattans were a group of peoples that lived on this island and farmed it and had a variety of communities and did that for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. They lived in a way that I think is worth thinking about in terms of informing how we might want to go forward. Right? So one of the things is, my understanding is in many of these groups, women had a much stronger sense of being head of household than we typically see in our culture these days. And that extended to the notion of marriage and relationships. You know, we have a government right now that's trying to restrict women's activities on so many levels. But these groups really understood that women were just a key part of what can make a village work and really deserve to be respected and taken into consideration. Marriage in our early groups often was a little bit more flexible than we typically see in this country. And my understanding is it wasn't that uncommon for men to have multiple wives and possibly wives to have multiple husbands. So it sounds like what tended to happen is when a woman got unhappy with the person that was living with her, she could take his stuff and put it out. And so when he did arrive back, he would know. what to do, which is to go away quietly and not bother the situation, all right? That's something we might want to think about these days, don't you think? Not that I want to come home and find myself out in the front yard, but I think there is a quality of respect for people and respect for people in their places. Another part here was that, you know, they made a big stink about buying Manhattan for like $24 or something like that. Anyone heard that story? So the thing is, the native population, as I understand it, had a very different idea about being on a land. It's not that you owned the land, you borrowed it, you know, and you could maintain it so long as you could defend it, and you could defend it so long as you could kind of use it effectively. Right? And this notion of like selling land was kind of foreign. It took a while for the population to catch up. And even when they sold, the expectation of many of these groups was that they would stay put. It's not that they would need to go away. They would stay put, they would continue to farm, and they would continue to gather and do the things that they were doing. It just, you know, somebody else was giving this gift to say that they're also having control over this property. They could live with that. Thing is, things really turned out pretty badly for the native groups here. Anyone know any Manhattans? All right, so in a few short years, the population was decimated by a good 95%. Through wars, through alcoholism, because the settlers brought a lot of alcohol with them, but primarily through disease, smallpox and other diseases that just decimated the population. And then the remainder were kind of driven west when they started taking the property and expanding. But the populations continued to put forward people of goodwill and integrity to try to get the best deal they could get in a situation that was clearly deteriorating and really difficult, right? If you figure you had a population that only had a few tens of thousands of people in the first place, facing off against a group of colonists who were coming from places with millions, right? So there was always really just not a good matchup. But they managed to bring people together, make all kinds of agreements that they pretty much held to and hold on for quite a long while, despite the odds. It's great irony that Indian giver has come to mean people who take things away. The real people who were doing this, of course, were the colonists who kept making promises and then breaking them over and over again. But we can still hopefully delve back into the past to pull forward some of the things that are really worthwhile about these cultures. And they can be helpful for us today. Right? Similarly, we have, New York was a capital for selling enslaved people into enslavement for quite a while. One of the biggest slave auctions was down at, I think, Pearl and Wall Street, is that right? And the folks that were sold there, some of them were actually building Wall Street and doing other kind of things here, but mostly being sold down into plantations. And then the people that were in this part of the world were kind of making nice money off of the taxes that were applied because it was a city operation. So anyone who was sold, they had to pay a tax on the sale, not to mention all the investments that went into it. Right? So those are the kind of things that went through. The thing is, there were many people that came through and came out of enslavement that have stories that can instruct us in how we might become people of real integrity and strong will. So the person that comes to mind is Josiah Henson, who was enslaved for 40 years, primarily in plantations in the South. He did an autobiography that became a substantive copy for Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Many people think that the character Uncle Tom was actually based on him. Anyway, he really did his darndest to work with the system. He was a person who managed to get responsibilities of his own, and when he made promises, he kept them. He was told that he could purchase his freedom for $450, which was a lot of money at that time, and managed to make a way as a preacher and to collect enough money to get freedom for himself and his family, only to find out that the owner changed the stakes at the last minute so that he couldn't afford to go. And it was only when he found out that the owner was then intending to sell him off, apart from his family, that he and his family escaped to Canada. The thing is, what's really instructive here is, he could have just gone and hid out, but instead he realized that there were many people like him, many people that needed this support, and his dedication meant that he was able to put together a compound in Canada for people who had escaped the U.S. slavery, and also set up various job training programs and other kind of things. And he came back to the States to free other people. He worked with the Underground Railroad, and close to 200 people made their way to freedom with his assistance. This is the kind of dedication that can inform us, that you realize how bad a situation can be, but you look for avenues, positive avenues that you can pursue so that you can help make things go better. More currently, a couple days ago was the 50th anniversary of what? Stonewall Rebellion, right? And there's a lot of interesting stories that go around this, because it was certainly a difficult but also a colorful event. So my understanding is when the police arrived, they didn't really expect that they were going to get the kind of pushback that they got. And ultimately, the small group that they had to clear out the bar wound up going back inside the bar for safety and locking themselves in, and then had trouble getting reinforcements in. Anyway, so you had this big crowd, a big melee going on, and people shouting and turning over cars and all these kind of things. And when the reinforcements arrived, they formed one of those V's and kind of pushed their way in and pushed the crowd aside, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a situation where there was like this face-off. You had the police line in one spot and a line of protesters on the other. And one of the things that happened at that time was a number of the protesters, who also happened to be dressed in female attire, formed a chorus line and started singing and dancing to the police. Right? And just imagine the humor of this moment. They had this, it was kind of taunting and all, but there was just a lightness about this particular part of their protest that really carried the day for many of the people that were present. 50 years later, they're still talking about that chorus line. And well, they should. Now, an instructive part about this, by the way, I would consider that a really positive action on their part to try to diffuse a really dangerous situation. A lot of times when we do these positive things, we don't see the benefit right away. So just a fair warning, I'll be making some other suggestions. Sometimes things still go badly afterwards. So in this case, the police then rushed the line and beat everyone with batons and put them in paddy wagons and took them away. So that night did not go so well for these folks who were doing something positive. However, what is it that sticks with us down the road 50 years later about these protests, right? Are we imagining that LGBT people are violent and aggressive and terrorists, right? No, right? Think about the Pride parades. They're associated with fun and abandon and release of all the pent-up frustrations and restrictions, so that people can kind of have this freed up sense of who they are in their community, right? What a positive thing that has become over time. By the way, I know there's people from the Westchester Ethical Society at one of the marches today, so a shout out to them joining in the fray on that front. A little bit more contemporary activity has been going on. So there's a sociologist, Arlie Hochschild. Anyone know Arlie Hochschild? Okay, a few people. So she was, I heard her on the NPR show On Being, and she was talking about her work. She's like a very liberal person from Berkeley, California, a professor at Berkeley, and was really quite surprised by the resurgence, or the upsurge of the Tea Party. And in particular, the upsurge of the Tea Party in Louisiana. Louisiana is a state that had been just about, well, it really is decimated by the corporate destruction of so much of its environment. And yet the people in Louisiana were solidly voting in favor of people that were bringing in more industrialization and reducing the restrictions on how the environment would be dealt with, et cetera, et cetera. So she was very puzzled by this and decided that what would be helpful for her is to go to Louisiana, spend some time with people to get a better handle on, how they came to this place. And she realized that folks were really coming from a place, a deep emotional place. She called their deep story. And that deep story was infusing so much of their life with ideas about what it meant to be a good person, how you were to go forward in terms of promoting your community. And those stories were very different from the story that she herself had as a liberal person growing up in a Unitarian Universalist family. The thing is, she noticed too that there is this emotional wall that tends to separate us from people who have these different deep stories from the ones that drive our lives, right? And she would call this an empathy wall. And the empathy wall is a difficult thing to hurdle, right? Because what you find is when you hear these ideas, it's hard not to feel contempt for the people that are expressing that, right? Think about, people making expressions about how segregation is a good thing, or how we should be removing environmental controls, or how the government needs to control, stop supporting abortion, or I don't know, name your area. It's hard when people are expressing views to not feel contempt, and yet contempt will bring us to a place of fighting, not a place of connection, right? How do you connect with somebody that you feel contempt for? And yet, how do you get past that? Right? That was the hurdle that she was faced with. And so she wound up living with these folks for several years, and one of the things that she found, lo and behold, is that these folks generally were nice people. They were kind, they were thoughtful, they cared for their neighbors, they really were making their best effort to put what they thought was their best foot forward. Now they came from a very different place, right? But they were still working with what they thought was a place of integrity. So how do you deal with that? Ed Erickson, people remember Ed Erickson here? He was actually a leader here a good number of years ago, as well as at the Washington Ethical Society. Ed was the recipient of the Felix Adler Lifetime Award at our assembly in Tampa just last weekend. And one of the things that he was saying is how important it is for us in our effort to live positively to learn to listen to people, and to learn to listen to people while suspending judgment about them. His point was, if you're listening with the idea that you can now change their minds, you're probably on a path that will not be very effective. But if you're listening with an ear towards understanding what is driving the person toward their behavior, you have a better shot. Right? And when you connect with people, you get more headroom when there are differences. Right? In other words, if you just go with that first initial break, it's very hard to get past that. But if you can start from a place of reasonable comfort, oftentimes you can avoid the level of conflictual content that makes it so difficult for people to keep communicating. On my way back from Florida, I had the opportunity to visit with my brother. I think I've spoken to my brother here once before. My brother voted for 45 and would do so again, probably will, when he gets the chance. And so you can imagine we don't see terribly eye to eye on many things. As I said, the one thing we have in common is we emerged from the same womb. However, I did get a chance to visit him, my wife and I, and we had such a lovely time. First of all, their regard for us taking the time out to be part of their lives was really important to them, and they showed that. They showed the yearning for closeness and connection, and that was powerful, it was palpable. Right? How important is that? We didn't talk politics, and that was a good thing, right? Because we were able to keep establishing that connection. He has 2 daughters and now 2 grandkids, and we're all connected with each other, and we were able to share stories about how we're trying to maneuver our lives into ways that we can be proud of. Both my brother and his wife were real hellions as teenagers. And so they were able to talk about their struggle to become just like parents who are responsible and taking care of their kids, and how relieved they were by how it worked out. Now, he and I are not going to vote together. And I wish he was living in a state where his vote didn't matter. Unfortunately, it does. But be it either way, the important thing for us is to continue to build our connections, right? Because down the road, it's those connections that will make the difference for our being able to relate to one another in a way that has some level of respect and some readiness to move forward. And it also helps us examine our own glass houses a little bit more, right? I mean, so many of us, we have our own things going on. We've inherited a fair amount of stuff that probably we wish we wouldn't have. I know for myself, one of the things that's making things crazy in Louisiana is how corporations are vying for ways to go after these states that are the poorest in the land, because they have the best shot at being able to do things there without much pushback, right? They need them so badly they can get a really good deal. Well, who's financing these corporations? Well, a lot of us are, right? Our retirement plans, our savings plans, our various investments here and there are contributing to a market mentality that says the profits are king, and that you need to get things at the best rate you possibly can. You got to keep prices low, you got to monetize everything. These are the kind of things that are not really helping people that already live in poor states, right? Well, how well are we really examining our participation in that system? How well are we pushing back against that system so that we can help make things a little bit better for other people? So it really is important for us to keep on the positive, to connect with people that have different stories than our own, and to keep finding ways to figure out how can we still be on good terms even when we have very different agendas. And it's not easy. I did want to say that there's, what's his name now? Dyson, the vacuum cleaner king. He was also interviewed on the radio. I'm just kind of strolling up to Sir James Dyson. So he's invented that vacuum cleaner that is bagless, based on his own experience, and I guess that is enough of a contribution. But to my mind, he also contributed something important to me in his interview on again on NPR. I'm a big fan of NPR. And this is what I've learned from running. What I've learned from running is that the time to push hard is when you're hurting like crazy and you want to give up. The moment you should, that is the moment you should accelerate. The moment you should accelerate is the moment that you are most tired. Glasses will be helpful here. I'm going to read this whole thing out. What I've learned from running is that the time to push hard is when you're hurting like crazy and you want to give up. The moment you should accelerate is the moment you're the most tired. The beginning of the final lap is the testing point. And so I found that to be in life. Success is often just around the corner. You might make a discovery, You might call it obstinacy or determination. And he also said in there something that really stood out for me. He says, the thing is, when you're at that point where you feel you got nothing left in the tank, that's the point where most people give up. Right? But we're giving up too soon. There's still more there, despite what our body or our mind is telling us. There's still more there. And it's worthwhile pushing through, because you have the chance then to reach a new vista, to reach a new level, and to maybe experience some joy in living. So with all that in mind, I invite you to join with your own positive efforts to bring more caring and fairness into your community and the communities around you, to bring it to your local area, to the larger world, and beyond. Right? Your passion, your commitment, your persistence can make a real difference in life now and for the future. What are you prepared to do? And how can your efforts be best supported? Wish you the best.